Hey everyone, Josh from KindOfALotOGaming here again, and Adam is behind the camera again. Today we are going to be doing another screen swap, or screen mod I should say. We're going to be taking a Game Boy Color and giving it a Frontlight from a Game Boy Advance SP. Can't do a backlight because the Game Boy Color screen doesn't work like that, but it'll be Frontlight, so it'll be cool. Gonna give it a shot. Haven't done this before, so it should be interesting. Here we go. For this mod, you will need a Game Boy Color, a Game Boy Advance SP model AGS-001. Model AGS-101 actually won't work, that is a backlit screen. For this mod, you will need the frontlit screen Game Boy Advance. A tri-wing screwdriver, a soldering iron and some solder, some wiring. You'll also want a soft surface to lay everything on to avoid scratching any screens or surfaces. We just use an old t-shirt. A pair of pliers, a Phillips and flathead screwdriver, a pair of clippers, a can of compressed air, a tool for prying. A flathead screwdriver will most likely work fine, but we had a dedicated tool, so we decided to use that. A pair of tweezers, and a 47 ohm resistor. To start the mod, take out the batteries of your Game Boy Color. Seems fairly obvious, but there are 6 tri-wing screws on the back of the Game Boy Color. All 6 need to be removed to take apart the casing. Once the casing is apart, there are 3 Phillips screws towards the bottom of the system that are holding the motherboard down. Remove those screws. On the top of the motherboard, there is a ribbon cable attached in this socket. There are 2 small tabs on the right and left sides of the ribbon cable socket. Push those tabs towards the top of the system to release the ribbon cable from the socket. Then just pull the ribbon cable out. This will completely detach the screen from the motherboard. Once you have the motherboard out, you'll have to pry the screen away from the Game Boy Color case. There is a small rectangular section right above the ribbon cable that is actually a very good spot to start prying. Once you have a little bit of an edge up, it's easier just to take your fingers and pull the screen away. Next, you'll need to take apart the Game Boy Advance SP. If you need help on how to do this, we have a separate walkthrough on taking apart the Game Boy Advance here. With the Game Boy Advance screen taken out, the first thing you'll have to do is remove the front protective plastic on the screen. This can be done simply just by prying it away with your fingers. On the back of the Game Boy Advance SP screen, there is a thin layer of styrofoam that's adhered to the back of the screen. This needs to be removed. Easiest way is to just take your fingernail, find an edge, and keep pulling it away. Takes a little bit of time, but it should come off fairly clean. Once all of the styrofoam padding is removed, the next thing you'll have to do is take apart the bezel around the screen. It's a black metal. Use your prying tool or a flathead screwdriver to release the tabs that are holding the 2 parts together. Once you have all the tabs released, the ribbon cable is still threaded through the bezel, so don't pull it apart too quickly. Again, on the back of the screen there is an orange pad with 2 silver contact points on it. You'll have to pry this away from the screen. It should come apart fairly easily. Just take your flathead screwdriver or prying tool and slide it underneath the orange pad. It is held together with some light adhesive, so minimal force should be needed to take it apart, but just be careful to keep this all in one piece. Once you have that piece unstuck from the back of the screen, you'll have to clip one end of the ribbon that's connected to the bottom of the screen, not the end of the ribbon that's going into the black bezel. Once that ribbon is cut, you should be able to pull the black bezel free from the screen. You will no longer need the Game Boy Advance screen. On the front of this black bezel, there is a layer of black adhesive tape. You'll just need to pull this tape away. It literally is just tape. For the most part, don't worry about breaking this, you're just going to throw this tape away. Once all that tape is removed, you should be able to remove the front light from the bezel. Just be careful with the orange pad again. There is a slot for the pad to go through. Just push it through there and it should pull free, no problem. Now you're going to want to take the front plate of your Game Boy Color. There is a surrounding plastic molding where the original Game Boy Color screen would fit. You want to put the front light in there, mark the edges where the front light hits the bottom of that plastic molding that contains the screen. Now take your clipping tool and clip the edges that you marked. Try not to clip any wider than you marked. The remaining plastic is going to keep your front light in place. Once you have those edges clipped, the remaining plastic on the bottom in between, clip into small sections. Once those are all clipped into small sections, you just need to take a pair of pliers and twist. They should come out pretty easily and leave you with a pretty clean section to put your front light. Now you should be able to lay down your front light in the section where the Game Boy Color screen will go. On the Game Boy Color motherboard, there is a set of 4 vertical pads towards the bottom. You'll want to solder your 47 ohm resistor to the topmost pad. The other end of the resistor you'll want to solder some wiring to. Leave some extra length to the wire so you can cut it to the proper length once you need to. Now you're going to put down the front light into the Game Boy Color casing. Before you do this, you want to take a can of compressed air and spray out any dust that might have gotten inside of the casing. Also, we took a microfiber cloth and some lens cleaning spray to clean off the front light. Once you have the front light laid down, you want to put the Game Boy Color screen on top of it. Make sure you have all of the buttons back inside of the system. It's just annoying to have to open up the system and put those back in afterwards, if you forget. Once all that is in place, you can put the motherboard back on top of everything. Make sure that orange pad is sticking out from underneath so you can solder to it. Now secure the motherboard back to the case with the 3 Phillips screws that you removed earlier. Now take your wiring that's coming off the other end of the resistor that you soldered on, cutting the length to make sure there's minimal amount of extra wiring. You do also need to solder a ground wire from the motherboard to the orange pad. We found that the casing around the on-off switch on the motherboard was a good place for a ground. When soldering to the orange pad, the right solder point is where you want to solder the ground to. The left is where you want to solder the power to. Once you're done with that soldering, that's really all you have to do as far as modding. Now just put the back of the case back on and screw down the casing. Again, with these screws, since there's a little bit more inside of the Game Boy Color, it's going to take a little bit more force and you're going to be compressing some stuff down within the case, but it shouldn't take too much more work than usual. Once all those screws are back in, throw in some batteries, throw in your favorite game, and now you have a front-lit Game Boy Color with glowing button.